Right, so let's get to the next agenda point then. So we're going to have a discussion then about our housing and immigration policies and see if they overlap, exactly what they are, and let's dive into it a little bit more as an executive group. So I'm going to ask Gwyneth first, if I may. So the question really is the UK housing crisis primarily a supply problem, a demand problem, or an allocation problem?
Mm. So, so basically, yes, as we have probably heard extensively, in recent times, it's been is housing a supply problem? Is it a demand problem? And often, the solution that seems to be offered up by other parties is that, they're looking at this as a sort of a supply issue. There's constant calls for more and more and more housing to be built. In Enfield, where I live, there's been like a very sort of like big issue lately about building on the green belt. The council that was recently voted out, they were all for it. Local residents, as you can imagine, were up in arms. We don't want our green belt built on, and so on. The other side that we've heard is like talking about the housing problem in terms of the demand side. So this is where we've heard sort of, the more populist side of the equation, perhaps, talking about immigration and, the population going up, and we're having to find housing for all these new people and so on. Um, and probably neither argument really sort of captures the whole problem. Um, because once you start sort of like digging into it a little bit further, you realise that actually what it comes down to is that housing is increasingly being seen, as a financial asset. You and I might think, well, our home, it's where we live. But, there are obviously people out there who are just looking at housing in terms of a number on a spreadsheet somewhere. And what it comes down to really is corporate landlords and investment firms buying up housing stock. This is why people are being squeezed out, prices are going up. You've got corporate landlords sort of like buying up lots and lots of property as an asset. Obviously, this is impacting people trying to get onto the housing ladder. They're having to rent. Their rents are going up and up and up. Housing prices, if you're looking at buying, is just going up and up and up. And basically, this is what it comes down to: corporations treating housing like stocks, and everybody is just getting squeezed. So, it's not just a simple case of building more houses. It's not a case of simply reducing immigration. The real answer is taking back housing from these corporate investors, and housing should be for people and not just treated as a corporate asset.
Okay, so as a party then, would we stop institutional investors from being able to buy properties?
Well, the thing is, you've got to look at this in terms of sort of making it easier for people to actually buy their own homes. So certainly, investment firms shouldn't be able to bulk buy residential homes. It should be, these should be available for individuals. They should be available for families, to enable people to get on the housing ladder. And certainly when you've got these foreign investors, so for example, you've got a big sort of investor from overseas, perhaps some big international hedge fund firm, they shouldn't be able to just buy up housing stock and leave them sitting empty, which is the situation that we've got at the moment.
Okay, so if that can solve some affordability issues, then if there's less demand from institutional investors, and whilst there may be some additional demand from immigration, that's not the sole reason at all. That's what we're saying.
But yes, basically.
If we can get rid of that, then let's move to Ian and Anne and say, so if we get that, then do we have the right type of housing available to people, given that institutional investors will be getting kind of multiple blocks of flats and stuff in the centre of London and Manchester and other places like that. So do we have the right type of housing?
Well, I suppose, honestly, no. I mean, there's various different factors at play here. You've obviously got to consider that you've got to make it attractive. We've got to sort of walk the line between what Gwyneth was saying quite correctly, which is preventing, the hoovering up of housing stock, but at the same time, giving them the incentive to do giving them the incentive to do anything in the first place was the first issue we've got to overcome. But I would say that the major issue isn't just immigration; it's also underrepresented parts of society. A big one.
Well, immigration and institutional investors. That's what Gwyneth was saying. It's the institutional investors more so than the immigration.
Yes. Yeah, yes, exactly. But for me personally, I would look at other areas of society other than immigration, or immigrants, I should say, / refugees. My top target would be the disability community. I have been in and around the disability community for a number of years. Both me and my wife are wheelchair users, and we constantly see it all the time. That alongside the perennial problem that everybody has of rising rents, which isn't just exclusively to disabled people, it's exclusively to everybody, it's the lack of suitable stock in the first place for disabled people. And in terms of building, building suitable housing stock for wheelchair users or for deaf users or whatever it might be. Because at the moment, I think the waiting list in some areas was up to 5 or 6 years, depending on where you looked. And you've got arguments between like the medical professionals over whether somebody's in suitable housing, and then when you exacerbate the problem of things like, like certain areas are in demand because of like seaside towns and whatever, that's when you've got the perfect storm of problems. So you've got the physical access to the stock. You've got the investor problem we've just identified, and you've got the market forces of saying, I'll use one example, a Welsh seaside town. Obviously, you're not going to get those either. So for me, I think we've got to consider very carefully how we balance the needs of everybody.
It's a really interesting take on it, actually, and because I've looked at some of the figures overall. And if you look at England, 1.34 million households are on the social housing waiting lists. But I have no idea about how long they wait, whereas you're describing 6 years on a waiting list for disabled people.
I'm obviously different areas will have different figures, and obviously we'll have to pull those figures together to get a proper average. But I just recall one conversation with a sort of an acquaintance, and she was saying how she was stuck in basically on a ground floor of a flat that wasn't suitable for her because obviously, her medical needs have changed, and she was waiting for 5 or 6 years to find something suitable, and even then, there was a massive argument, again, subjective, so we've got to be careful, but not accusing anybody of anything. But equally, the other problem that we had, or that she had, was that there was funding in place via the Disabled Facilities Grants to adapt properties, because that's what that funding is there to designed to do. But the landlords could physically stop it and say, no, we're not agreeing to that without a valid reason.
2 points I'd like to raise on that, even though one of them's in the past. Me and Ian were rather fortunate that we had family backup to help us with a mortgage, or all these years ago. We were thinking of renting. So we got the housing association. We were on top of the list, and they were like, "Oh yes, we can have this property." They say this to the landlord, and I don't know what landlord it was. We are talking about years ago, and they basically said they wouldn't adapt to property. Am I correct? Do you?
Yeah, basically, the from what I remember the story now, and I'm not naming the landlord involved, but basically, yes, that's exactly how I was describing. The OTs and the social services and everybody else and the NHS were all willing to work together to get us this property, to adapt it properly, and then the housing association in question said no. And we asked what the reason was, and the answer was we don't have to give a reason. We can just deny it because we are the landlord and what we say goes. And from that point of view alone, I've heard of multiple stories of that being backed up across the country. So that is also an issue that needs to be considered carefully.
Yeah. I wonder if the new is it the tenants' rights help that out, but I'm guessing that's at the point when you are actually already in.
Yes, from what we can gather, or from what I could gather, obviously I need to look at the new laws properly, but they obviously safeguard things like the Section 21. Get rid of those completely, don't they? The no fault eviction things. Obviously, they safeguard the rights to have cats and dogs, or whatever it was, or certain types of animals anyway. But I don't recall seeing anything regarding, and I'm not mentioning disability specifically because obviously it's a much wider issue than that, but just to use disability as one example, I don't recall seeing much else other than that.
No adaptation. And you mentioned two things. Did that cover both of them?
Yeah, I don't. You can add this if you'd like, Martin. But the other thing we are noticing, especially now, the percentage of disabled people, through various conditions is increasing. So we're gonna get to a point where a specialist type of housing is excessively required, and the government is obviously not ready for it.
Yeah.
Well,
that was a very brief point of mine.
I was going to also add on to that before we move on to other matters, Dan, that so many suitable properties exist, but they have age restrictions or other covenants / limitations on them, which don't make any sense. I'll give you one example for us. There was one property that everybody agreed, it was in Wallasey actually, yeah? There was one property that they agreed that was suitable for us. It needed hardly any adaptations doing to it. It already had a wet room, already had a ramp, so it had most of the stuff that we would need. You're talking about minor tweaks rather than anything like tearing down walls or whatever. And because we were under the age of, what was it, 50 at 55. The time, 55 at the time, they said, nope.
Well, you shouldn't be so young. That's that.
But that's the thing that people are getting frustrated about, is that there's an old adage in the disability circle. I'll paraphrase slightly. There are those that are disabled and those that aren't disabled yet.
Good saying. So, right. Well, thank you very much for introducing that. And I'm sure many people wouldn't even have recognised the problems they've got that. So if we're talking that from a supply problem, then it's being taken up by institutional investors. Demand, there's way bigger demand for specialist and specialised housing. And I was looking at the social housing numbers as well, and there's a huge shortage overall of that. So it looks like the right types of properties just aren't available. And Earl, I'm going to come to you now because I think we need to have a look at something which is kind of skirted around at the moment, which is about the immigration issue. But against the background of what we've heard already, is there really a need for immigration levels to be linked to the infrastructure capacity? Because we are increasing the numbers of houses by a couple of 100,000 a year. And immigrants are kind of about that level as well, aren't they? 110,000 and beyond each year. So should immigration levels be directly linked to the infrastructure supply? Oh, have you got wasp or something?
Oh no, I was going to sneeze. Literally.
Great timing.
I'll ask the question again, Martin. Sorry.
So, should immigration levels allowable be linked to the infrastructure capacity that we have in this country?
In my opinion, definitely yes.
And what would that mean? What would that mean then for immigration?
Well, you'd have to monitor it in a say, I'm trying to think of the best word to use. It would need to be monitored better.
In an accurate way.
In that more accurate way, yes. Obviously, there are certain entities that illegally get people into the country, and that's always been the part of all countries, really. And most of those people aren't registered, and they're not put into housing. They don't go and get universal credit or housing, things like that. They're usually put into different places. But the registered refugees, the ones that come in, those numbers do need to be tallied against, obviously, the amount of property that we have and the correct type of housing as well, because you've got multiple people occupancies in some places. Like my cousin bought a house, and they had 8 people living in a 3-bedroom house, and they put up walls and stuff like what do you call it?
Just a partition wall.
Partition wall.
Yeah, yeah. And they put them all up, and when he moved in, they had to knock them all down. But people were living in just like little in squalor, basically. So not living in a healthy way. And you wouldn't want that for people if they're trying to escape a country of war-torn country. People coming into the country that need help.
Refugees is different though, isn't it? Refugees is a temporary situation.
Immigrate. I suppose yes. To immigrate, and a refugee is someone that's running. Yeah, that has no choice.
Although they have the leave to remain still in place in here, so that's an issue.
Another one, but our property, our housing, it needs to be in par with the population that we have, the right age population, etc. Also, the costing and stuff is ridiculous. So anyway, yeah. So my answer is yes.
Okay.
In total.
Thank you. Can I introduce something else as well? Because I've been thinking about this as we've been talking. Our overall population is expected to start declining in the near future. So 5 years or so, whatever it comes from, then it is expected to decline because the birth rate is below 2. So given that, why is there such a focus on desperate focus to get more housing stock built? Surely it's a repurposing, isn't it?
Or if you take China, for instance, I remember this must be over 10 years ago. I watched a documentary in China, and they were building 80,000 properties a month or something ridiculous. It was like way above, but no one was in there. They were just blocks of flats with no one living in them because it was financial investment. People were buying into it's financial gain assets, as Gwyneth quite rightly said. So you get people that, and sometimes the governments are involved in this. They get a kickback. They get an Egyptian handshake. They get that kind of little bit of rollback of money, and everyone gets their sort of beaks wet, and so to speak. So property being built doesn't always mean it's for people. It's an asset. It's a benefit, for them, obviously, not for the people. But with that in place. If you're building property, it should be for the reason of building property. You're taking up green belt space, etc. Like saying in Enfield, and we're not overpopulated in this country, not by far. And if we are declining, then why are we building? The question is, why are we still building property? We're going out of fashion. But the fact is, we don't need it. So there has to be an ulterior motive. There has to be other cofactors within the scope of building property. Obviously, economy, jobs, bricks, builders, bricklayers, plasterboards. There's all the thing that's moving forward. People are still kept in jobs. But it would beg the question: what other cofactors are at play here? What actually is going on? And the one in China was about financial gain and assets and government bribery and fraud, and it was a whole load of things. Banking communities were involved, gangsters, mafiosos. So it all rolled in, and it was a big ball of wool.
Was this the whole Evergrande scandal then? Where they eventually went? Did they go bust? I can't remember whether they did.
I forget the company. It was there's quite a lot of companies involved, construction site workers and foremen. There was a mafia were part of it as well. I say mafia, if I forget which the Chinese mafia is triads, is it?
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong. Yeah, well, yeah. It's yeah, but behind it were loads and loads of little smaller groups of people that were getting financially more wealth, were getting more and more richer from these kind of builds. But like they said, this property was just empty. There's no one living there, and they weren't even for sale in some cases. They were just there.
So in the end, then, I mean, if it's like China, then supply is not going to be a problem. It's actually, and if we needed people to be employed, then we could repurpose existing homes, because everybody's seen the centres of towns, haven't they? And areas where we just see them well, degenerating, really, all the housing stock. So if we get that right, then we could do it. So let's recap on this. Gwyneth, institutional investors, they seem to be the big problem of driving up affordability for people as well, which means that there is an increased reliance on social housing. People just can't get onto the housing ladder. Ian, and the right type of housing isn't around. So even if we had enough of it and the supply and demand was balanced out, we'd still need to make sure the right type of housing is there.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And Earl, you're talking about the impact on immigration. Well, we shouldn't let hundreds of thousands of people come into the country if we can't support it from the infrastructure. It doesn't make sense, but we need accurate recording. We need to know where people are going. We need to know how to manage them. So I'm going to give everybody a choice now. If you're in government and you could choose one priority about this, only one, and you have to remember these, you have to choose one of 6. Build more homes, build more social housing, reduce immigration, reform the planning laws, restrict investor purchases, or bring empty homes back into use. So we all can have one.
Restrict. What was the one again? The
restrict investor purchases.
That's the one.
Okay.
Definitely. Restrict, stop, whatever. Yeah.
Ian, Anne?
For me, I'll have a say in a minute, but for me, it would be reform the planning laws.
Reform planning laws. Anne?
You see, I think different on this. I would say reduce immigration. That may sound slightly controversial.
Controversy is good.
We like that.
Obviously, because it's been an ongoing problem, some of these individuals aren't exactly that productive.
Okay.
And I'll leave it at that, because
that's fine. We've got more discussions on this one, I'm sure, in the future. So thank you for that. Gwyneth, do you have a favourite out of those 6?
So I think I would go for preventing the bulk corporate purchase of housing stock, because I think that many of these other issues we've been discussing are kind of downstream of that.
Yeah, understand. My favourite on this one is bringing empty homes back into use. I think there's a lame excuse that says it costs more to bring an existing house into use than it does to build a new one on Greenbelt. I can't believe that.
I was going to say,
I refuse to believe it.
I was going to say, Martin, I was sort of torn between that one and the planning laws, but the planning laws seem to win out in the end. But it's very interesting how we've got, obviously, all of us here, and most of us to come out with a completely different answer.
Well, you can't just choose one then, isn't it? Which is why we've got a wide-ranging policy on this and on both. But I think it's clear, though, that whilst we have immigration and housing policy, immigration is not the single cause of our housing shortages. I think that's quite clear. So it needs to be looked at in the round. So thanks for walking us through this all. Thanks for taking the notes as well, Sarah. So I think that concludes our meeting.